In a surprising turn of events, Barclay Goodrow has been placed on waivers. Did the Rangers make the right call? Will Barclay Goodrow be claimed by another team? And what happens if he does not get claimed? We discuss on today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers.
You're Locked On the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1094 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. So I want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So news breaking here on Tuesday afternoon, maybe about an hour or so ago, that Barclay Goodrow has indeed been placed on waivers by the New York Rangers. And the timing of this is borderline eerie because we actually, in our episode just yesterday, did not the entire show, but we spent most of the show talking about Barclay Goodrow and what the Rangers could potentially look to do with him. Do they, trade him? Is it possible that one of the teams that is not on Barclay Goodrow's no move clause would take Barclay Goodrow and what would essentially be a salary dump by the Rangers, just take Barclay Goodrow off the Rangers' hands? Was there a situation where the Rangers might be best served to go the buyout route? You buy him out and obviously you get some cap relief for this season. It's going to hurt you a little bit in future seasons, but that was certainly an option. I did not see this coming, though. I did not see the Rangers putting Barclay Goodrow on waivers, and there's a couple different ways we can look at this. I'm going to start with a reason or two why waivers does make some sense if the Rangers are indeed committed to moving on from Barclay Goodrow and freeing up some cap space. So by placing him on waivers, you create a situation where any team in the NHL can claim him. Now, obviously, if the Rangers try to trade Barclay Goodrow, 15 of those teams could possibly be vetoed by Goodrow himself. Goodrow's got the partial no move clause. He has the right to block a trade to any of 15 teams. We don't know which 15 teams those are, but the bottom line, if you try to trade him, you can only trade him to half the league if we assume that Goodrow would block a trade to any of the teams that he could block a trade to. And if you put him on waivers, you create a situation once again where he can be claimed by any of the other 31 teams. And if he is claimed, whichever team picks him up would then be responsible for, the rest of the money owed to him, all the rest of the years on his contract, and the Rangers can completely, wash their hands of the Barclay Goodrow contract. But this move by the Rangers, putting him on waivers, that tells me almost for sure that the Rangers pretty much went down the road of trying to trade Barclay Goodrow already. Because if you could trade Barclay Goodrow and potentially get even something small back for him, I think that's the route you would want to go. On top of that, if you trade Barclay Goodrow, obviously you've got a little bit more control of where he lands. You can trade him out of the division, even out of the conference to a Western Conference team. So there's that. There's also the fact that, you would be free of his cap hit if you traded him, if we assume that the team acquiring him would be willing to take on, once again, his entire contract. But by placing him on waivers, there's a very real possibility and honestly, a likelihood that Barclay Goodrow is going to clear waivers. Nobody's going to claim him. It's not that nobody would want Barclay Goodrow on their team. They just don't want him for 3 years remaining at the cost that he's at, which is $3.64 million. So that kind of leads me into why putting him on waivers, your eyebrows go up a little bit. I'm going to make some sense of it at the very end here. But you put him on waivers, and again, it's very likely he's not going to get claimed by anybody. And if that happens, then Barclay Goodrow goes to the AHL. And you might hear that and think like, well, if he goes to the AHL, then the Rangers, they get some cap relief and they're not responsible for paying him. It's not really that simple. There is something that is, it's been nicknamed over the years as the Wade Redden rule. And anybody that remembers Wade Redden on the Rangers, I'm sorry. If you're young enough that you don't remember that, then consider yourself lucky. But the bottom line, the Rangers signed Wade Redden to a 6-year deal worth $39 million. He was absolutely awful in 2 seasons with the Rangers. They put him on waivers. He obviously cleared waivers. They sent him to the Hartford Wolfpack. And just like that, his entire salary was buried in the AHL. It did not count against the Rangers salary cap. The NHL has since course corrected, and now there's a situation where teams really can't do that to the extent that they used to, bearing a bad contract in the AHL. The way it works now, my understanding is that if this were to happen with Barclay Goodrow or anybody else, they clear waivers, you send them to the AHL, you can only bury $1.15 million of their cap hit in the AHL. So if Barclay Goodrow clears waivers, which again, I do consider likely, and he goes to the AHL, you're looking at a situation then where the Rangers would basically be paying Barclay Goodrow $2.5 million to not play for them. There would be a $2.5 million cap hit in this scenario, instead of having a $3.6 million cap hit for Barclay Goodrow to be on the roster. And when you look at it that way, does that really make a lot of sense? Like, I know Barclay Goodrow struggled this past year, and he's another player that's basically split this fan base right in half. But I don't know. Even for me, somebody that was open to the idea of trading Goodrow, maybe even buying him out under the right circumstances, I look at that and I think, man, you're going to have a $2.5 million cap hit and have him not here rather than just have him here and pay $3.6 million. I'm not so sure that that's really worth it, which leads me into the next thing that I want to talk about, which is the idea that if he clears waivers, which again, I think is the most likely outcome here, I get the feeling that Barclay Goodrow will then be bought out by the team. They're putting him on waivers right now on the off chance that one of the other 31 teams steps up, and that's all it takes. It just takes one out of the 31. They step up, they claim Barclay Goodrow. Oh, cool. We can wash our hands. We don't owe him another dime, and we can do whatever we want to do with this newfound cap space here. If Barclay Goodrow, though, is not claimed, I get the feeling that the buyout will be coming. And of course, that can't happen until 2 days after the Stanley Cup final ends. So we'll see when that happens. Game 5 is a little bit later tonight. So we'll see how that shakes out. But yeah, if Goodrow does not get claimed and then gets bought out by the Rangers, which again, I think this is the way this whole thing is eventually going to shake out eventually, then you're looking at a situation where the Rangers have an extra $3.88 million in cap space for this upcoming season, which is actually more than Barclay Goodrow's cap hit. All the buyout scenarios for different players are always a little bit different. And in the case of Barclay Goodrow, they actually not only, would they create all the cap space by Barclay Goodrow's contract not being here, they get approximately an extra $250K in addition to that for the first year of a Barclay Goodrow buyout. The issue is what happens after that, because if Barclay Goodrow is bought out this offseason, then the Rangers are still going to have he'll still be on the books for an additional 6 seasons because it's twice the length of the amount of years remaining on the contract. There's 3 years left on Barclay Goodrow's contract. That means there's 6 total years left that he would still be on the books for the New York Rangers. And we're going to continue breaking down this situation in just a second. One other point that I'll make right here, right now, though, is that when you look at the scenario of Barclay Goodrow being bought out, it's manageable. For the most part, the only year that would be difficult will be the 3rd year of it, where there's more than $3 million in dead money to Barclay Goodrow. So that'll be difficult for the Rangers to circumnavigate that situation. However, that's also the season when Jacob Trouba and Artemi Panarin become unrestricted free agents. So obviously you get a lot of cap space relief from that perspective. But yeah, there's a lot going on here and a lot of different ways this thing could still play out. We're going to break that all down in just a second here. And also going to, give a heartfelt thanks to Barclay Goodrow if he has indeed played his last game with the New York Rangers and, go through some of his highlights while he was here with the team. We will do all that stuff in just a second and continue to, again, just kind of dive into this storyline from every possible angle. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Big shout out to the everydayers as always. Thank you guys as always for supporting the show. And in the episodes to come here, we're going to continue covering this Barclay Goodrow situation. Does he get claimed? Does he get bought out ultimately by the Rangers? We'll see. There's going to be some more draft talk, some more free agency talk surrounding the New York Rangers as well. But in the meantime here, I do want to give a heartfelt thanks to Barclay Goodrow and, everything that he brought to the table for the Rangers. I realize he has his critics, and do I think he's worth $3.64 million per season, despite what he did in the playoffs? I have to be honest here. The answer is no. But even with that being the case, I do want to, like I said, give Barclay Goodrow a proper send-off if he has indeed played his last game as a New York Ranger. And I should probably start right there for this portion of the episode here, because Barclay Goodrow, it's at least possible, very remote chance, but it is possible that he actually has not played his last game with the Rangers. Now, if he gets claimed on waivers, obviously he's gone. Whichever team claimed him, they get him, and that's the end of that. If he does not get claimed and also does not get bought out, then he goes to the AHL, and it's at least possible that at some point next season, he could get called back up to the New York Rangers. I don't know how likely that is, because the Rangers will presumably have the same problem then that they have right now. And that's the very simple fact that they're just paying a little bit too much money to Barclay Goodrow, and they just can't afford it anymore. There's also sort of a loophole or a technicality, whatever you want to call it, where a team, in theory, can buy out one of its players, and they have not yet bought out Barclay Goodrow, so we'll see if that happens or not. But they can buy out one of their own players and then sign said player to a new contract. There's no rule that prohibits that. It's pretty rare that happens, because most buyouts do not result in as much cap relief as the one that will occur if Barclay Goodrow is bought out. Not only do they get all $3.64 million of his salary back to spend however they would like for this upcoming season, but as I mentioned earlier, an additional, about $250K on top of that. So it's a unique situation. Never say never as far as that scenario unfolding with Barclay Goodrow and the Rangers, but is it likely? No, it's not. And with that said, let me go in and also acknowledge the people, the fans of this team that are going to be upset, maybe even flat out angry about, this waiving of Barclay Goodrow and potential buyout as well. Bottom line for me, again, you just can't pay $3.64 million per season to a fourth line player. It's just too much. You look around the rest of this league, there aren't very many guys playing on the fourth line that are making that much per season. You look at the Ranger fourth line, there's guys that, were kind of came and went throughout the entire season. Most of them are at six figures or, somewhere in that ballpark. And that's also true, like I said, when you look around the rest of the league. I know Barclay Goodrow was awesome in the playoffs. He shot at 40%, but let's be real here. Does anybody really think that that's sustainable? I understand that he stepped up and he battled, and he does have a skill set that's tailor-made for the postseason. And in this last playoff run here, 16 games, 6 goals, 2 assists, more goals in the playoffs than he had in the regular season. Obviously, the overtime Game 2 winner against the Panthers, that's the one that really stands out. I do want to point something out here, though, for everybody saying that, Barclay Goodrow is, just amazing in the playoffs, and he's this and he's that. Look, he was awesome this past playoff run. Do not get me wrong. And as I said when it was happening, I think for a team to win a Stanley Cup, to have a shot at it, you need a couple of players like that that are going to exceed expectations and give you more than you were thinking they were going to get. And Barclay Goodrow was absolutely that dude for the New York Rangers. But I would also like to point out here, in the 2 playoff runs that Barclay Goodrow had with the New York Rangers before, this postseason run that just concluded for the Rangers, he ended up with only 2 points. He had 1 goal and 1 assist in 16 games in the last 2 playoff runs combined. So it's not like he does this every year, turns into Wayne Gretzky. And I realize, points aren't necessarily the biggest part of Barclay Goodrow's game. And obviously there's more to hockey than that, but I don't want there to be people out there thinking that he turns into a point per game player every single year when it comes to the Stanley Cup playoffs, because that's just simply not true. But, just as sure as there are fans of the Rangers that are going to be angry, upset, in tears about losing Barclay Goodrow here, there's also going to be fans that I think are too extreme on the other side of the spectrum, where they're popping champagne bottles and acting like, this $3.64 million that the Rangers could clear up here, that's going to, result in Stanley Cup glory. as is usually the case when you're dealing with something like this, the truth usually lies somewhere between the two extremes. And you got to give Barclay Goodrow credit for some of the things that he did well since coming in to the New York Rangers. By all accounts, he is we know he's a hard-nosed player, but he's also a leader in the locker room. And quick side note here, I've seen some people on social media talking about Barclay Goodrow, and this is the group that's really excited that he's presumably not going to be part of this team next season. And they're saying things like, anytime that an analyst or even fans mention the fact that somebody is a great locker room guy or a great leader, the reason that they're doing that is because they can't say anything nice about his on-ice hockey game. And maybe there's like a little smidge of truth to that, but I recall a player, he played for the New York Rangers. Longtime fans will probably remember him, Mark Messier. Yeah, what's one of the first things that comes to mind when you think of Mark Messier? It's the leadership. It's that hard-nosed, tenacious style of hockey. The fact that, he could get in somebody's face and challenge them to be better. And he was one of the greatest players of all time. And yet the leadership and the intangibles, that, at least for me, and maybe for a lot of you guys too, that comes to mind first and foremost when you're talking about Mark Messier. Even before all the points and all the big playoff moments and all those things, you think about the leadership first. So I don't think that idea that if you credit somebody for leadership and being a good locker room guy, that means that they're automatically bad at hockey. I don't think that's true. We're allowed to credit Barclay Goodrow for being a good locker room guy. And the bottom line, before he got here, obviously won the 2 Stanley Cups in Tampa. And the first season that Barclay Goodrow joined the New York Rangers, they became winners. Now, was he, the guy steering the ship and he was the guy leading the way for that? No, obviously there were some other players in the Rangers that did that, but the culture changed, and it changed for the better once Barclay Goodrow got here. And we could debate how much of a role he had in that. Was he, the guy in the locker room that made that happen? Or was he just one of a few different players in the locker room that, helped the Rangers go from cellar dwellers into winners? We don't know for sure because we don't see everything that happens behind the scenes. But the bottom line, it is difficult to ignore that fact that right when Barclay Goodrow got here, along with some other players for the Rangers, things began to turn. And obviously they made that very improbable run 2 years ago to the Eastern Conference Final in a season where a lot of people didn't even think that they were going to make the playoffs. He brought a physicality and an edge that was certainly lacking at the time, and obviously the Stanley Cup pedigree as well. As far as some of my favorite Barclay Goodrow moments, and you guys can go ahead and leave these in the comment section if you'd like. The Game 2 overtime winner against the Panthers. I mean, that was obviously huge at the time because Rangers were down 1-0, and you don't want to be down 2-0 against the Panthers going on the road. And Barclay Goodrow made sure that didn't happen. Knocked down the puck in the neutral zone, a little give and go with Vincent Trocheck, and the finish from the center of the ice. Huge goal by Barclay Goodrow. The 2 goals in Game 3 against Florida, that was the game that the Rangers gave up the lead, but ended up winning in overtime as well. The Game 6 empty netter this year against the Carolina Hurricanes, it wasn't even so much the goal as it was the celebration. Barclay Goodrow scored an empty netter from his own zone, getting close to the blue line, kind of along the boards. Heck of a shot, even to an empty net. But then, he goes to his teammates. He doesn't go to his teammates on the ice. He goes to the bench, and they all hug each other. And they knew at that point there was about a minute left, and they were up by 2 goals, and seemed pretty obvious that they were going to be moving on at that time. I would say last year, the Game 5 fight against the Devils, I forget who it was that he fought, but it was somebody a lot bigger than him. And it was one of those games where the Rangers just did not have that extra gear, which, we've been through that. The Ranger performance against the Devils last year in the playoffs was completely unacceptable on all levels. But Goodrow, fighting somebody bigger than him and then kind of young at the bench and trying to wake everybody up and get them going a little bit. And I think, you think Barclay Goodrow, just his willingness to do all the dirty work and play physical, kill some penalties. That's another thing. The Rangers have had one of the elite penalty kills in the league the last handful of seasons here. And he's obviously a big part of that. He's out there, maintaining position, blocking shots, doing whatever he's got to do to help that unit and help that be an elite unit for the Rangers. One other thing that I'll say in Barclay Goodrow's defense here is I really wish he would have gotten a shot with Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider in the playoffs. I mean, they tried everybody else there, right? Between the regular season and the postseason, everybody else got a shot on that line. Barclay Goodrow never really did, and he was on a heater in the playoffs. And I think, his physical style of play, that might have been a good match for Mika Zibanejad and Chris Kreider. I mean, I'll try it over, Wenberg. I'll try it over Roslovic. Roslovic, had his moments in the playoffs, but there were games where he was also a ghost. I think he was probably their best option at that point, and they just never went to it. As far as, what happens next, if he's not on the team, One of the questions that kind of popped into my head is, do they name another alternate captain? Because that's a role that Barclay Goodrow has had for the last handful of seasons here. If they do, to me, it's either Alexis Lafreniere or Vincent Trocheck. I would lean toward Lafreniere because I get the feeling Lafreniere could very well be the next Ranger captain. If Jacob Trouba plays out the rest of his contract with the Rangers, he's got 2 more years, then he's a free agent. At that point, I think Lafreniere is going to be a bona fide superstar. And people have talked in the past, even coming into the league about his intangibles and his leadership. See, there it is again. We've heard about Lafreniere being a great leader and having intangibles as well. It doesn't mean that, he's not good in other areas of the game. But I think he'll be a superstar by then, and they'll be looking to kind of turn it over to the next era of Ranger hockey, and it could be Lafreniere leading the way. Vincent Trocheck's a great choice too, but I would lead toward Lafreniere a little bit as far as if they want to replace Barclay Goodrow with a new alternate captain. We shall see. But yeah, we're going to keep everything rolling in just a second here. I want to shift our attention to, just some final thoughts on Barclay Goodrow and why it is really unfortunate that it came to this. It really just comes down to the contract. If Barclay Goodrow is out there making 6 figures or even low 7 figures, like most fourth liners do, I don't think there's a problem, and I don't think he's getting waived and or bought out. But we'll discuss all that and try to figure out where Barclay Goodrow might land. We will do all that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Ultimate Hockey GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NHL GM and managing your hockey franchise? Do you think you could run the Rangers better than Chris Drury? Well, your dream can come true, and this game is most definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through the seasons, and lead it to glory. Hire the right coaches and staff, trade players or draft picks, navigate through free agency and the draft, all in a challenging and realistic game world. As a Ranger fan, you guys know there is no offseason. GMs are constantly making moves at every point of the year to improve their team's chances, and that's why I think you are going to love this game. Ultimate Hockey GM is completely free and playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want to. By the way, Locked On Network listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in the game store, so make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit hockeygm.app or look it up on the App Store. Ultimate Hockey GM, start your dynasty today. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here. Some final thoughts on, an unfortunate situation. Like I mentioned in our most recent episode, that was before Goodrow was waived, but I'm talking about the idea of trading him basically for nothing or buying him out and just kind of dealing with the subsequent cap hits in the years to come as they happen. And now he gets waived. It's rough that it came to this. It sucks because it's such a lousy message to send to your team, because Barclay Goodrow stepped up in a major way in the postseason, and here we are, not too long after the postseason ends with him being waived, and there's a good chance he's going to get bought out as well. The way things stand right now, the Rangers have made a determination. And again, they might eventually, buy him out after likely nobody claims him. But they have made a determination that they are better off taking a $2.5 million cap hit this season for Barclay Goodrow to not play for them than they are simply paying Barclay Goodrow his $3.6 million to play for the New York Rangers. That's rough, and that's got to be a bitter pill for Barclay Goodrow to swallow. Now, on one hand, hey, he's paid very, very handsomely to play a game and be a professional athlete and live the life that a lot of people dream about, and that's awesome and good for Barclay Goodrow. And I suppose from a certain aspect, you can't be too upset for him. But you know what? These guys are all human, and this is rough. I'm sure it's tough to go through it. I'm sure that wasn't a fun experience for Barclay Goodrow today. Probably wasn't an enjoyable phone call, and I would imagine it was probably Chris Drury who made the call. That can't be a lot of fun on his end either, because Chris Drury, he likes players like that. He's talked about the need for the Rangers to get bigger, more physical, tougher, all that good stuff. Barclay Goodrow is one of those guys, but again, it just comes down to the contract. If it wasn't for that big contract, Barclay Goodrow would still be on this team, and I don't think anybody would really bat an eye at it. I realize he's not a superstar player. There's times where he struggled this season and just didn't play all that well. But, I mentioned the penalty killing. I mentioned the physicality. I mentioned the leadership. There are some things there to like about Barclay Goodrow. And if he's on a contract that pays him, $900K a year or $1.1 million a season, I don't think there's any issues. And I think he's right back on the fourth line for this upcoming season. And in fact, he might even be one of the more liked Ranger players among the fan base. It's just that contract that basically has gotten in the way almost right as soon as he got here and continues to get in the way. And if he was going to stay with the Rangers, if they didn't do this, if they kept him on the team and brought him back next season, it was going to continue getting in the way for the rest of the contract. And that's just the nature of the situation here. Barclay Goodrow for $3.64 million, when you've got boatloads of cap space, as the Rangers did a few years ago, it's like, all right, that's a little high, but it's fine. They've got plenty of room, but they bring in some players and some of their own guys need to get paid and everything gets tighter. And oh my God, how are we going to create some cap space? And you can look at Cap Friendly or any of these websites, Puckpedia, and that contract really for the last couple of years has stood out like a sore thumb. And it's like, that's the one that the Rangers are going to have to shed if they need to create some more cap space. And again, it's unfortunate. It's not unfortunate for Barclay Goodrow because he's gotten paid a lot of money and a lot more than most fourth liners get. But, we're in this situation now largely because of that contract. So it is unfortunate from that perspective. I also wonder, how does the Ranger locker room react to this? Look, they're all professionals. They have to deal with it. They understand this is a business. It's a business from the team's perspective. It's a business from their perspective. They all become free agents and they want to get as good of a deal as they can get for themselves. So it is a business. They have to understand that and, just move on. But yeah, Barclay Goodrow, I've always gotten the sense that he is well respected, very well liked in the locker room, and that he is legitimately one of the leaders of this team. So, I'd imagine not too many players in the Rangers were exactly thrilled to hear this news. But again, that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to the professional sports industry and the business side of it. As far as the Rangers go, how do you replace Barclay Goodrow if we assume that he will be on his way? I mentioned a couple minutes ago, there is that ever so slight possibility they buy him out and then re-sign him to a much smaller contract. Never say never, but I just don't see that happening. So if Barclay Goodrow is indeed gone, then how do you replace him? Well, there's free agents out there, and I think what you have to do is find somebody who has a similar skill set, but just doesn't cost that much money. Go out and sign somebody for high six figures, low seven figures, somewhere in that area, somebody that can kill penalties, somebody that can play physical hockey. If they happen to be a player that steps up a little bit come playoff time, then that's an added bonus. That's actually a massive bonus if that's the case. You think about Barclay Goodrow. I've always compared him to Brian Boyle, similar skill sets, I would say. And it seemed like both of them always brought their game to an extra level when it came time to the Stanley Cup playoffs. Guys like that are just built for the playoffs. If you can find somebody in that vein, then I think you've done well if you're the New York Rangers. And we're going to take a look around the league. Free agents, the big price guys and some under the radar guys that might make some sense for the Rangers. We'll be doing that in the episodes to come here. As far as where Barclay Goodrow ends up, I wrote down a couple of teams. This is basically just off the top of my head here, but if he ends up leaving the Rangers, which again seems very, very probable, I figured the Sharks, there's an obvious connection there. He used to play for them. He had that big Game 7 overtime winner a handful of years ago against the Vegas Golden Knights. And that's a team that's very young and could probably stand to add, a tough veteran leader such as a Barclay Goodrow. So that's certainly possible. Maybe the Coyotes for the same reason. Now, Barclay Goodrow never played for the Coyotes, but same deal. It's a team that is moving and, they're trying to put the pieces together, and having a veteran or two in the locker room could make some sense. You could say the same thing about the Anaheim Ducks, another young team. And as far as a Ranger connection, Ryan Strome and Frank Vetrano are both there. So Goodrow at least knows a couple of guys in that locker room. Would that entice him? That's possible. And on that note, you can't list a list of landing spots for Barclay Goodrow without, unfortunately, mentioning the Tampa Bay Lightning. They just brought back Ryan McDonough, so maybe they trying to get the band back together over there in Tampa. But Goodrow obviously knows a lot of the players there. Won Stanley Cup with a bunch of them. Knows the area. Knows the coach. That might be as likely as anything. I thought maybe last one here, the Edmonton Oilers could make some sense. They're in the finals right now, of course, but they always just feel like one of those teams that could use a little bit more thump, and maybe Barclay Goodrow could fill that role for them. But if this is the end of the line for Barclay Goodrow at the Rangers, all the best to him. Again, I just really, really hate the fact that it came to this and that it just comes down to the money situation, because if it wasn't for that, Barclay Goodrow would still be a Ranger going forward. But it is what it is. And I think this is a situation where it's not something that the Rangers necessarily wanted to do. It's not something they were eager to do. It's not something that they took any happiness in doing. However, it's just a necessary evil. You got to find a way to open up some cap space, not just for things happening this year, but certainly next year when you've got a whole score of free agents, including Igor Shesterkin, Alexi Lafreniere. Lafreniere's an RFA, but he's still a free agent. And so too is Keandre Miller. He's an RFA next year as well. So, it's one of those things where you need to create some cap space in one way or another at some point. And the Rangers look to be doing that with Barclay Goodrow. And I do think that, again, my prediction, he goes unclaimed on waivers and then will subsequently be bought out by the New York Rangers. And we'll discuss the ramifications of that if and when it happens. Figure we can pretty much call it there. One last thing I want to do here, though, before we call it a day. The Rangers just announced the other day their preseason schedule. So we'll just go through these really quick together. Mark your calendars for September 22nd. I believe that is let's just find out here. September 22nd is a Sunday, and I believe that game starts at 5 p.m. So mark your calendars for that. Sunday, September 22nd at the Bruins, 5 p.m. And then the rest of the Ranger preseason games, it looks like they're all going to start at 7 p.m. September 24th, home against the Islanders. September 26th, home against the Bruins. September 30th at the Devils. October 1st at home against the Devils, and October 4th at the Islanders. And let's just all try to remember, it's the preseason. Don't lose your minds over something that's happening or something that's not happening. I know I'm giving an advance warning here, but I just want to get ahead of this. And without looking, can you honestly tell me what the Ranger record was in last year's preseason? For anybody that was might need a refresher, they were 1-5, and then they went on to have the best record in the NHL. So take preseason with a great game of salt, but obviously it's definitely worth circling on the calendar, and it will be nice to see the Rangers back in action. It's only about 3 months away, so definitely looking forward to that. That will do it for today, though, guys. Once again, if you'd like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well at LO_NY_Rangers. Once again, that's at LO_NY_Rangers. And definitely subscribe to the Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.